I want to talk to you about slave ships. There are about 3 million ships worldwide that have wrecked. And about 1% of those ships have been um, explored. And most have been discovered as a result of accident. And the remainder have been searched out to recover lost treasure. So when you look at the global picture of ships that have sunk, about 1% of those who have wrecked have been recovered. And very few ships survived from the 17th and 18th century, and even fewer from the 15th and 16th century. And most that have survived only survive in some parts, or parts were recovered, um, and or they are replicas, or they are ships that were preserved because they were part of a naval fleet or some other governmental institution that maintained and preserved the ship most of the time out of water. So it's important to look at the whole issue about ships in general to understand the total context. Slave ships, there are an estimated 1,000 slave ships that sunk during the transatlantic slave trade. This doesn't include ships that sunk during the Ottoman slave trade. This is just dealing with the transatlantic slave trade, dealing with the European slave trade. So it's important to understand in context. There are people now who are claiming that there was no transatlantic slave ship trade, and that there are no slave ships. There's no evidence of slave ships, but there is a substantial amount of evidence about slave ships. Um, First of all, we do have a limited number of shipwrecks that have been uncovered, that have been identified, that some artifacts have been recovered from. But in addition to that, there are robust records of shipbuilding, particularly throughout Europe, where governmental records were maintained, corporate records were maintained. There are insurance records that where insurance companies like Lloyd's of London paid claims for lost cargo for slave ships. In addition to that, there are port records. Most of the slave ships that transported African slaves, except for pirated type ships, actually obtained their cargo from an official port, such as Gorée Island or Elmina Castle or Cape Castle or Christiansborg Castle or Badagry or Bimbia, or one of the 79 official slave ports that European countries set up along the west coast of Africa. There's also robust records in terms of the cargoes when they reach their destinations in the so-called New World. There are records of the ships arriving in the New World, and tax records and other documents showing the cargoes and how many people and the value. And so in terms of when we start looking at it, there are advertisements where slaves were for sale, and in many cases they were reported that they were from a particular slave ship, and that it would say where they come from. A lot of times it would give other details. In addition to that, we also have slave narratives, where people who were brought on slave ships later made narratives and told about what happened, described their experience being captured in Africa, described their voyage across the Atlantic, and described the experiences that they had being brought into slavery. In addition to that, there's a number of books that were published by slave ship crew members and captains who actually were part of the transatlantic trade and worked for various companies that were engaged in the slave trading business. And so they wrote about, what they saw, what they experienced. Um, so when we began to actually look at the record that exists, it is utterly ridiculous to deny that there were slave ships and that the transatlantic trade actually occurred. And so I just wanted to record this and so that I could share this basic information.